London youngsters are drunk on ordinary household glue. New research shows that glue sniffing is killing far more people than previously thought. What can be done to control this menace before more teenagers suffer? There's a popular image of solvent abuse, or glue sniffing as it's usually called. It's something skinheads do to shock passers-by. But what many people may not realize is that their own children could well be doing it in attractive suburban parks like this. Glue-sodden crisp or freezer bags and tins like these are the telltale signs of a place used by the sniffers. There's now growing evidence that the sniffing craze is spreading rapidly amongst youngsters from every type of background all over the country. Parents are aghast if they discover that their children have been doing it. But when they try to discover how they should react, they find it impossible to get clear advice. Some people say that the first sniffing session could be enough to condemn a child to drug addiction or even sudden death. But others claim the risks are slight and that for most teenagers, it's just a passing phase. Today, we're going to try and unravel fact from fiction to show just how serious the problem is and what can be done about it. Some people may find certain scenes in this program distressing. We should emphasize that we shot them only because it's impossible to understand the nature of the problem without seeing just what's going on. In every case, the youngsters we show sniffing were doing so unprompted by us and well before our cameras started turning. Last summer, the life of one London boy came to a sudden end. Stephen Anthony was found dead on a staircase near his council flat home in Islington. He'd lived there with his mother, a messenger in the civil service, and his father, a chauffeur.
He was always so sensible. We just thought that he's just not one of the idiots of life, you know. He was a really sensible boy.
He did love life, I'd say that. He did love life. He was Chelsea mad. He loved Chelsea. But he wasn't one of these boys that caused trouble.
Stephen Anthony was only 16 when he died last June. He'd just left school and had been lucky enough to get a job straight away. Stephen's prospects looked good, and his parents were happy for him. But they were stunned to find out that he'd been glue sniffing in out-of-the-way corners around the estate.
Yes, I was shocked. I told her the dangers of it. To which he said, well, he wouldn't. He said he'd swear he would never do it again. And we assumed that was about the second time. Because the next time he'd done it, it wasn't the glue then, it was the aerosol. The gas butane thing, which was near his body when they found him.
From what they've told me, he was already dead when they tried to revive him on the stairs. They said that he'd fell, knocked himself unconscious and choked on his own vomit.
Terry and Mavis Anthony are still a long way from getting over their son's death.
We've all altered. None of us are the same. None of us ever will be the same. Just impossible. He wasn't one of these nasty little layabouts and loudmouth yobbos. He was just a fun-loving boy, you know.
The handful of pathetic deaths like Stephen Anthony's are the cases that make the headlines. There's much less publicity about the majority of sniffers who don't die. No one knows how widespread solvent abuse is. But we had no difficulty in finding young sniffers, either alone or in groups, all over London, from the West End to the parks and open spaces of the outer suburbs. There's no doubt that there are several thousand young people in the region who indulge in the practice. It was through acting as a lookout for a group of sniffers that Mick, an 18-year-old from Hendon, started on the habit that he now can't shake off.
Well, I started about 5 years ago when I was with my mates, you know, because they was all sniffing glue, right? And I was just watching them for about a couple of weeks. And after a couple of weeks, I was on my skateboard, And I was going down the road and I found that old tube on the floor, you know. I picked the old tube up, I took it to my house, I went back to my bathroom, in my house, right, in my bathroom, and I just started sniffing it from then. I got a buzz in my head, and from that day I just started sniffing it all the time, like, you know.
The reason, of course, that young people like Mick and his girlfriend Karen sniff is that it makes them feel good.
I just do it to get a buzz, to get high. That's all I do it for. That's about it. All I can really say about the buzz, but, you know, you get different things, you know, you get trips, and once I imagined myself in a phone box, you know, and I saw loads of people in the phone box, and thousands of people in the phone box, and... What?
Mick and Karen may feel good, but their intoxication means that they run the risk of harming themselves. The problem of solvent abuse and the effects of sniffing on young people was first investigated by Dr. Joyce Watson.
The intoxication so caused goes through the entire range that one would associate with acute alcoholic intoxication, from the euphoria and then through to the slurring of speech, the blurring of vision, double vision, the staggering and uncoordinated gait. And finally, if the intoxication goes on further, it goes on. We come to look at the other sorts of effects that have been caused. There's been a great deal made of liver, kidney and brain damage, and certainly there have been sporadic accounts of these over the last 10 years.
On top of these risks, abuse of solvents, rather like abuse of alcohol, can make people forget their inhibitions and release suppressed aggression.
I have, in my own experience, known of people fight with knives over the use of the last crisp bag. I have known people use offensive weapons against one another as to who sniffs first and last. I have known children end up in hospital through deliberately, but one use the term deliberately when they're so intoxicated on glue, deliberately pushing people into water.
When sniffers are clearly putting themselves or other people in danger, the police do have certain legal powers which allow them to intervene.
We have three clearly defined areas which we can act. One is under the Public Order Act for threatening or abusive behaviour. Secondly, under the Children and Young Persons Act for children in need of care and attention. And thirdly, under the Road Traffic Act for people who are using a motor vehicle on the road whilst under the influence of drugs.
But despite the disturbing consequences of solvent abuse, sniffing as such is not in fact an offence. Parents like Terry and Mavis Anthony feel strongly that the authorities should be doing more to tackle the problem.
Let's find two MPs with sons or daughters and let them see their sons and daughters take glue and die from it, and let's see what they would say then. Then maybe they'd do something. If it was their own, there might be a different light on it then.
The spectacle of youngsters sniffing in public, like these in Leicester Square, has aroused widespread concern over the hazards of the practice. A number of measures which might help reduce the practice are being considered. The first is that sniffing in public be made an offence. Teddy Taylor, MP for Southend East, is very worried about the number of youngsters involved in sniffing in his own constituency and is campaigning for sniffing in public to be made illegal.
Now, if we were, in fact, to make it unlawful to do it in a public place, I think it could, in the case of those who are caught, get them before the courts, and the courts can obviously do something with youngsters like that, not just sending them to an offenders institution that can get them put in touch with people who can help them onto a more stable lifestyle. The other thing, of course, it will stop it being done in a public place, and thereby, I think, remove a temptation and an encouragement from other youngsters who might otherwise not get involved.
Not everyone agrees, however. Tim Egger, MP for Enfield North, is also actively involved in trying to find ways to combat the problem. But he fears that making sniffing illegal could be counterproductive.
If you make sniffing itself illegal, then the chances are you're going to drive it underground. Though you already have areas, certainly in my constituency and elsewhere, where sniffers know where to go to congregate, the culture develops. Now, all that will happen if you make it illegal is that they will be driven underground, if you like, into more inaccessible places, and the chances are that people will become more inbred, and there'll be less chance of helping them, in my view.
The second proposal to control solvent abuse relates to the actual products that are used by the sniffers. The idea is that there should be no sale to minors of the glues that affect them. One of the main reasons it's so difficult to stop young people sniffing is that they can buy glues in many hardware stores, self-service DIY shops and supermarkets. But the problem doesn't even stop there. Some shopkeepers are consciously exploiting the sniffer market. In February, the News of the World interviewed George Moore, who runs a souvenir kiosk just off Piccadilly. The article said that he sold a sniffing kit of glue with a plastic bag for £1.55. He was reported as saying that he didn't care how it affected youngsters. His motives were strictly commercial. We decided to see if Mr. Moore would explain why he's still got glue on his shelves alongside the souvenirs. But Mr. Moore just attacked our camera.
Fuck off! But of course this.
MP Teddy Taylor witnessed the attack and has his own views about people like Mr. Moore.
But the fact is there are far too many shops round about our city centres like this who sell things for tourists, things for youngsters, but also sell pots of glue. It doesn't seem to make sense at all.
Yes, sir. I'd like to buy a bit of that trellis one. What size do you want?
Of course, most shopkeepers are not as irresponsible as this. John Baker runs a hardware shop in Homerton, East London. Since he realised that the glue he stocks can be used for sniffing, he's taken it off the shelves. He won't sell it to youngsters he thinks are sniffers.
That way, but if you want to put it up the wall...
We were selling, you know, an unusually large amount of Evo stick, and, you know, we become aware, you know, and we thought, well, this can't be, you know, normal trade, and it wasn't long after that when the local beat policeman come in, Ian Taylor, and had a chat with us, and of course by this time there was reports in the trade press, and of course what we had to do was take it off the self-service shelves and put it under the counter.
John Baker believes that this system of voluntary control by shopkeepers has helped. But in his view, making it illegal to sell glue to minors would improve matters still further.
I think it would be useful for the shopkeeper to have the backing of the law, if you like, because occasionally, not often, a kid can get offensive, but of course if you've got the backing of the law, then you are, you know, well within your rights not to sell it, you know.
But here again, there are serious doubts as to whether such a change in the law would really work.
I think it's simply impractical. If you simply say, well, right, we're not going to ban certain products, but we're only going to sell them to people over 18 or 16, whatever the cut-off is, you get exactly the same problems we have now with films, kids underage getting in to see films where they shouldn't go, or drinking in pubs. It just is an impossible line, in my view, to draw.
The third proposal, aimed at reducing sniffing, is to legislate to make manufacturers display prominent government health warnings on the containers. Labels on products containing dangerous solvents already give instructions on how to use them safely. But many people think that a larger warning, saying directly that sniffing damages your health, similar to that on cigarette packets, might help to deter some youngsters. But here, as with the earlier proposals, it's questionable whether such a move would have more than a limited effect.
I doubt if it would help in practice because, you know, it might in some ways almost add to the attraction of saying this can do you damage. I think we see the same with youngsters with cigarettes. I think often the health warning printed in the packets, quite apart from what's taught in the schools, which I think does some good, I think it has no real effect on the youngsters.
The fourth, and perhaps the most obvious proposal that is being made to control solvent abuse, is that new formulae for the products sniffers use should be developed. One suggestion is that the solvent-based glues could be replaced by water-based or other glues. According to the manufacturers, however, this is not possible.
Glues have to do many different jobs. Some jobs can be done perfectly well by water-based glues, but for many specific purposes, you've got to have solvent present. Let me instance plastic gluing as in modeling kits. Let me talk about gluing rubber and gluing inflatables. Another nice case is gluing Formica onto wood. Now, this involves contact cements, and you can make aqueous contact cements. But water takes longer to evaporate, and the glue tends not to be as effective. The bond isn't as effective. In practice, the products have been on offer, and the consumers don't like them. So for some purposes, you positively can't use non-solvent glues. For other purposes, they aren't so effective.
The other possible way to make glue lose its appeal for sniffers might be to add something with an unpleasant smell to put them off. Here again, though, there are problems.
This seems a very simple and attractive idea. I think it's a very bad idea. It's a bad idea for three reasons. The first reason is that if they're unpleasant for sniffers, they're going to be very unpleasant for the people who use them legitimately. The second reason is the ones that have been tried so far, and there has been quite a lot of work done, are ineffective after about 6 months, so that it's a temporary effect, the vile smell, and at the same time they tend to stop the glue working effectively. However, I think the most important reason is that there is a tendency for products of this sort to be hazardous.
But even if a non-hazardous additive or a reliable solvent substitute for glue could somehow be found, there would still be a problem. This is because glue is not the only product that can be sniffed, although apparently it's the most popular. Most homes contain 20 or so spirit-based or aerosol products, such as dry cleaning fluids, nail varnish removers, lighter fuel, deodorants and fire extinguishers. Each of these products has killed sniffers, and the chances of finding substitutes or additives for all of them are zero. It seems then that the popular proposals for controlling solvent abuse don't have much chance of cracking the problem. All of them face fairly formidable practical difficulties. It's partly on account of this that recent governments have declined to legislate on solvent abuse. Indeed, they've always said that there's very little that central government can do. The attitude they've taken is that sniffing can be best controlled by local agencies, with campaigns of prevention in the community. As recently as the 11th of March, the Minister of State at the Home Office, Timothy Raisin, said,
"The approach favoured by the government and supported by people experienced in helping those who abuse solvents relies on persuasion and education."
One place where they've done more than most to put the idea of education and persuasion into practice is here at the offices of Off Centre in Hackney, where adolescents with all sorts of problems can go for help and advice.
Basically what we need to do now.
Today, the Hackney Solvent Abuse Panel is meeting here. The panel was set up as a result of rising concern about the level of sniffing in the area.
It might be a good idea to approach the schools.
It's made up of a police officer, a parent, 2 social workers, an educational welfare officer, and usually a local doctor. They see a big part of their job as working together to provide basic information to other professional workers in the field, to parents and to youngsters.
Got a sort of small piece of green to play on, and you know they're afraid to send their smaller children down because if the bigger ones are glue sniffing, what harm they might do to the smaller ones, and that's the panic level we get at the infant school.
Well, maybe it would be appropriate for us to suggest that we go along as a panel and have a word with the teachers. And is there a parent-teacher association there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That last meeting we did at the secondary school was really excellent. I mean, it brought out some really...
One of the most distinctive attitudes of the panel is a low-key approach to the whole problem. They almost underplay the issue. They believe that the dangers of sniffing have been exaggerated by scaremongering in the media, and that this has made sniffing seem glamorous and exciting to young people, rather than putting them off.
The press have tended to really sensationalise the whole problem of glue sniffing, and there have been a lot of distorted facts. They've tended to focus on health hazards, which actually have nothing to do with glue sniffing, which have more to do with the more dangerous sort of solvents like aerosols and petrol, and they don't differentiate the two. A lot of young people do glue sniff, especially in the London area. It can be a passing phase. They'll experiment, it's a bit of a kick. And I think in this sort of situation, the best approach is not to panic about it, to take a very low-key approach, perhaps talk to the young person about the dangers and to try and communicate with them. and hopefully it'll pass over, as it normally does.
Yeah.
You had actually stopped glue sniffing, or were certainly stopping glue sniffing. You'd gone back to school. I believe you'd found...
The panel tries to ensure that the minority of sniffers with a serious problem get special help. They believe that youngsters only become heavily hooked if they have an underlying psychological or family difficulty. To overcome these, they often try to talk out the problem with the glue sniffer and his family. In this case, his mother and sister.
It's probably because I just don't understand why he's got back on it again. Or he had gone back on it again. And it
could you ask him now?
A shame. Well, yes, why? Why did you go back on it? Because we...
I suppose got together with some mates. I were sniffing. I just got tempted.
I think I'd like you and Ollie to just talk a little bit about Ollie's experiences in the last couple of weeks.
It became very ferocious very quickly because he had a tremendous amount of glue. I mean, tins and tins, didn't you?
Hackney's low-key approach can pay off, even with quite heavy sniffers, though it's a long process and success is never guaranteed. But the approach and the attitude underlying it also has serious drawbacks. The first is that the low-key approach by central government has meant leaving initiatives in tackling solvent abuse to local agencies. It seems clear that very few areas have followed Hackney's example, and that in most parts of the country, this kind of help is just not available.
I know very few other centres, like Off Centre, who deal specifically with the problem of glue sniffing, and I think it's interesting that I get a lot of phone calls from other agencies all over the country asking how to deal with specific problems. So I think there is obviously a great need for this expertise to be incorporated in other organisations.
The second drawback to the low-key approach relates to the health risks of sniffing. Non-medical workers with young people have tended to assume that some solvents, and glue in particular, are not in themselves highly toxic. They stress the danger of accidents, and so go out of their way to teach children to avoid dangerous situations like sniffing alone or in places where they could fall. In addition, they often recommend that youngsters sniff glue rather than other solvents, if they must sniff at all. Leaflets like this one, for professional workers, have a checklist of do's and don'ts for safer sniffing.
Don't be afraid to point out that some familiar glues, already commonly used, are relatively safe if used sensibly.
Unfortunately, it seems that many young people have taken this to mean that there's no risk to health from sniffing glue if this advice is followed. But new evidence shows clearly that this just isn't true. Here at St George's Hospital, Tooting, one of the few research projects into solvent abuse is being carried out.
That was case number 50, wasn't it? Right.
Dr. Ross Anderson and John Ramsey have recently completed a study, to be published next month, which for the first time pulls together data on deaths from solvent abuse from over the whole country. They've found that, contrary to popular belief, the whole range of solvents, including glue, has been a direct cause of death. Relatively few deaths happened as a result of accidents, or trauma, as it's known technically.
Well, a lot of people are under the impression that many of the deaths are due to accidents arising from behaviour, from using the solvents. But we found that well over half the deaths were definitely associated with the direct effects of the substance itself, and that only 10% were associated with trauma. So we have a lot of...
The study also shows that the death rate from solvent abuse is much higher than had previously been thought.
From the official statistics, we had the impression that perhaps there were 3 or 4 deaths occurring every year. But from our study, we have found that, for example, in 1981, there have been 45 deaths. Now, this doesn't seem a large number of deaths in a country of this size, but these deaths are occurring in an age group in which death from other causes is quite unusual. And so deaths from volatile substance abuse now account for well over 1% of deaths from all causes in adolescent males. It had been appreciated in the past that deaths did occur, but nobody was aware that they were occurring at this level. And I think that the size of the problem has been grossly underestimated in the past.
The other surprise in the study was that sniffing is not mainly confined to poorer youngsters in built-up areas, as is often supposed.
We've found that there's very little difference between the classes in mortality from volatile substance abuse. And furthermore, though the rates in large cities are about half as high again as they are in other parts of the country, and rates are higher in the north of the country than the south, we've come to the conclusion that social and environmental factors are not a particularly important determinant of the deaths.
One of the greatest obstacles in the past to finding out how widespread solvent abuse is and what its effects are has been the lack of a comprehensive test to identify solvents in the body. But now John Ramsey and his colleagues have cracked this problem.
Our method is one of the first that's capable of screening for all substances likely to be abused. It's not just solvents, it's not just glues. Our method is capable of detecting substances ranging from the aerosol propellants right through to toluene, which is the common constituent of the contact adhesives.
This test will certainly help to increase knowledge of which substances are being abused and how often, but there's still a long way to go.
Well, one very important gap is a virtual absence of any knowledge about the long-term health effects of solvent inhalation. We don't know if there are long-term effects, and if there are, whether they're permanent or what the risk is.
The vital need for this research is dramatically underlined by the plight of Mick and Karen. They get through 3 tins of glue a day, but nobody knows how much damage they're doing to themselves. To all appearances, they're in a bad state, both physically and mentally. After 5 years of heavy sniffing, Mick's eyes can't stand daylight, and he's noticed other effects as well.
It makes kind of slurred speech, you know what I mean? Slurred and that. And you get a couple of pains sometimes in your chest and that.
I get so high on it, I start crying, and I feel very suicidal in the end. I get suicidal. I get too high.
When I first started, I think it made me violent because I attacked my brother with a glue pot, you know, and beat him up and smashed him on the head with a glue pot.
Mick and Karen believe that the only thing that can help them now is a special clinic where they can live in and be treated. But the government, stressing prevention rather than cure, has said that there's no need for such places and no funds have been earmarked for them.
Well, I've got a lot of problems at home, right? And I think I need medical help to get me off it as well. I mean, my social worker, she doesn't really do much. I've got a social worker and she can't really help me. And the doctors have tried other places to get me off it, and, you know, just when they've heard that you're over 15, they don't want to know. And I just want to help to get off it, you know? 'Cause it's no good. I mean, you die from it in the end.
I think there is a real need for having perhaps some psychiatric beds, or at least somewhere where one could put a very violent chronic sniffer, even temporarily, to try and sort the problem out and let the heat of the situation die down. And I don't think in many places there are very many people who are willing to admit these people.
Very recently, the government has shown some signs of taking the problem of solvent abuse more seriously. On the 20th of April, Junior Health Minister Geoffrey Finsberg announced that the government will fund research into solvent abuse, consult voluntary bodies on what the government can do to help them, consult retailers on whether it's practicable for them to restrict sales of the glues they make to youngsters, and finally, promote books and a film designed to educate professionals working in the field. Many of those concerned about the problem believe that the government should be far more energetic.
Well, I think both this government and the previous government have been rather too relaxed about the problem. They've pretended to think, or tended to think rather, that it's going to go away, that it's a passing phenomenon, a passing craze, and that there's nothing that government needs to do. And that hasn't been borne out by events. I mean, bluntly, they've been proved wrong.
The Billington family, who live in Mitcham, have had a painful experience of the present shortage of informed help for sniffers. When they discovered that their son Kevin had been glue sniffing for over a year, they took him to the nearest drug abuse clinic for counselling. But Kevin found the staff there were really only equipped to help addicts of hard drugs and not sniffers.
Well, when I went to the clinic, it was hopeless. I mean, if I was totally on glue, there's no way that they'd have made me stop. It's only because I'd made the effort before. They were more interested in you, but I'd go on about your history and your parents and everything. There was nothing about the glue, because they didn't know anything about it, and they still don't.
In the end, it was the unsupported efforts of Kevin's own parents that succeeded in getting him off the glue.
If they'd done a big shouting match another scene, I wouldn't have changed at all. Because I realised that they were willing to sit down, I really wanted to help. I thought, you know, I can't just sort of kick them in the face and I said, I don't want to help. Don't want your help at all. I said, you know, I'll try.
Well, at first I didn't know how to help him. You know, I mean, because he didn't want any help at first. No way did he want anybody to help him.
You've got to have tremendous patience, particularly with a boy of that age. They've got so many interests, and really you've got to try and keep control of them all and make sure that he doesn't get into any other bother. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you all to the second meeting of the National Campaign Against Solvent Abuse.
As a result of his experiences with Kevin and his growing frustration at the lack of reliable information and help available, Alan Billington has become one of the leading lights of the recently formed pressure group, the National Campaign Against Solvent Abuse. At this meeting at Sutton's civic offices, he's trying to tell people about the problem and interest them in joining a local self-help group. John Ramsey and Ross Anderson have joined him on the panel.
Any questions in that area that crop up? We are trying to start up a help centre locally for addicts of glue and other solvents. We're working very closely with social services and various other bodies to achieve this, and we're hoping sometime in June that we'll be able to start referring teenagers to the Centre for Help.
Well, Chairman, my name is Phil Bassett and I'm a member of the Council and of the Education Committee. And my problem is I'm totally ignorant about it, you see. Whenever I try to find out, nobody's interested in talking about it to you. This is the sad thing. And if you look around here, where are our social workers? Where are our teachers? Where are any council officials at all to speak of? They think this is a subject which can be best swept under the carpet, as far as I can discover. First of all, perhaps only can tell me who've done it, what it is, what is the attraction, where do they start?
The question's been raised, why do you sniff glue? Have we got any of the teenagers in the audience who would like to answer that? Young man over there.
I like it. I enjoy doing it.
You like it? Well, there's no answer to that.
So what sort of stuff did you sniff?
What?
What sort of things did you sniff?
Glue.
Just glue?
Used to sniff, yeah.
You try anything else?
What? No.
Do most of you sniff glue?
Yeah.
You don't bother with anything else?
No, just glue.
Do you realise, or do you care that it may be harming you in any way? Yes.
I've got a book from the Samaritans.
Yeah.
It says that glue's in Narnia, I'm told. It says there's no proof of it.
That's a good point. Perhaps one of our medical experts would like to comment on that.
It takes a long while to establish what the actual risks are. But there's no doubt there are a significant number of children who are dead now who wouldn't be dead if they didn't sniff solvents. And that's a fact.
Do they actually die of sniffing or accidents from sniffing?
What's the difference? They're dead and they died because they sniffed solvents. And it doesn't seem very important to me whether they died because they fell in front of a train or a bus or what. They did it because they were under the influence of glue, just because this is where the deaths occur.
The meeting may have had some success in helping to galvanise local agencies into action, but the youngsters there didn't seem impressed by the arguments they'd heard. As we left, they went out into the grounds of the civic offices and started to glue up as usual.
Go on, Dermot, go on, yeah, yeah.
Mark's Basil.
Sniffing is clearly a practice that's here to stay, and it's vital that those in a position to act find out what needs to be done and do it as quickly as possible. Until that happens, more and more young people will be risking their health, and sometimes even their lives.
He's gone speak, Mark.